what it would take for the average mead Joe to make a pyment?
I think between honey and grape varietal, I'll stand behind Sauvignon Blanc and Orange Blossom honey all day. Mm-hmm. Just as I would with somebody that's getting into mead making for the first time. I always tell them, make a traditional mead. Use Orange Blossom honey.
Yes.
It's
hard to screw up.
I mean, obviously, yeah, you could screw it up, but it's pretty hard to make a bad Orange Blossom honey mead. So I'm in love with that combination myself, and the only reason we even use that Sauvignon Blanc with that mead I made for my grandfather is because I couldn't find anybody in Portugal within the amount of time that I had allotted to me to actually import the actual grape juice that they use to make Vino Verde there. But after doing a hefty amount of research, Sauvignon Blanc is actually one of the closest other grape varietals to the grape varietals that they use for Vino Verde. But you can't go wrong with that. Sauvignon Blanc, floral, citrusy, has a nice amount of acidity once it's fermented out. The Orange Blossom honey, kind of the same thing. And they go really, really great together.
Yeah, no way I would argue with that at all. I mean, I can imagine how that would be. I haven't actually put those two things together, but I can definitely imagine how well those would go together. I mean, I actually feel like I'm going to go grab a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc and a bottle of Orange Blossom mead tomorrow and blend them. Just
I want to go try this now, yeah.
But so some other ones that I've done, I've done a combination of Chardonnay and Pinot. So Alexander's makes winemaking concentrate that you can get through the homebrew shops. So for people that are looking for ingredients and don't necessarily have a lead on grapes, or it's out of season where you are, one of the things you can do is look for the 64 ounce canisters of winemaking concentrate, and they make a Pinot Chardonnay combination, which is really nice because you get it's white juice, so they've no skin contact time for the Pinot, so it ends up being a pale juice. But you get a combination of the various fruity characteristics of those two grapes, and it's a nice base. I've often used that and then maybe flavored it up or back sweetened it a little bit with some muscat, which has some additional kind of funky, perfumey, citrusy aromas to it, so it kind of jazzes it up at the end. So that's a combination I've used. For reds, I've thrown Merlot and Cabernet together and added cherries, in secondary to it. So I think where I'm going with it is that if people know a little bit about wine, if you've ever thought through what a Cabernet or a Merlot or a Bordeaux blend offers for aromas and flavors, you're right on top of that component of it. So then what do you want for honey? I mean, a wildflower honey is great with those red fruits. The berry honeys are even better because they bring more of that to the party. I was thinking about, as you were talking, Sergio, about the Cabernet Franc and some of the others, like a blackberry honey with a Merlot, because Merlot can be earthy sometimes, and blackberry honey can be also kind of full-bodied and earthy. That could probably be another killer combination that would be very different than the others we've already talked about.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I could definitely see that.
Yeah, and I mean that's the interesting thing is, what kind of combinations can you come up with? I mean, with it, I guess that'd be a Pyomel, something.
Yeah, it's definitely
Melament.
Melament,
something like that.
I mean, and I did it because
Weird Mel, yeah.
Yeah, it feels to me sometimes that and I guess I'll go back to an experience I had in Virginia in 2011. I was at the Wine Bloggers Conference there, and we're touring through the Virginia wine country in the Charlottesville area of the state, and we kept coming across a lot of wineries
have to do that.
that had a lot of varietal reds that they wanted us to taste on, and then they'd bring out the blend. And I wanted to speed right to the blends because I always felt like those were where the action was. And I even wrote a blog post like while I was on the trip saying, listen here, I love the varietals. They're neat to see what you can do with that individual grape, but you're selling yourself short not to actually put them together and make more volume of a blend from them in that Bordeaux style because you've got all the components. And I think when it comes to making Pyments, I've found that one grape variety alone doesn't necessarily create the full spectrum of character that you can get. You certainly can do that if you want, and they make wonderful ones. That, again, back to the Sauvignon Blanc and Orange Blossom, that's got to be fantastic. But I think some grapes like a Merlot, that can make just an everyday wine. If you use just that, it can also make an everyday mead, but you can add something to it. You can add some cab, or you can add a little cherry or some black currant, or maybe all of it. Throw Merlot and cab and black currant and cherry together, and you're amping up things that are already in the red grapes, especially if you did some of the fruit and secondary. You're enhancing the things that they are putting there, so you've got this background of all this great stuff, and then you kind of like the equalizer on the soundboard. You're like, okay, I want to kick the cherry up a little bit and kick the black currant up a little bit. Yeah. But it should be harmonious because those grapes have those elements to them already.
Well, and another thing to bring up is then, not only yeast selection is going to help amplify certain characteristics from certain grape varietals, but then you also have to kind of take fermentation temperature into consideration. We ferment pretty much everything at 62 degrees at Melovino, with very, very few exceptions to certain recipes where we might ferment a little warmer. I even have like a trick I do that for meads that I want to get a little bit more natural acidity from the fermentation. I'll actually ferment at 60 degrees. For whatever reason, it kind of starts bogging out the yeast, and they start actually creating more acidity during the fermentation. And then we heat it back up to 64, 66 degrees, and the fermentation keeps going. I mean, we kind of almost bring the mead to a stall, the fermentation to a stall, and then just let it kick right back up again. There's like different tricks that you could kind of use to get the similar characteristics from that wine varietal. But yeast selection, a Merlot fermented with an ale yeast is not going to give you a really great fruity Merlot. A Merlot fermented with a Chardonnay yeast is not going to give you a really great Merlot. So kind of look into, like on the wine side, what kind of yeast strains they do use to bring out like those really key characteristics from that grape varietal, and take that into consideration. So that's going to change everything. The yeast obviously is going to change everything, but fermentation temperature as well. If you're going to make a red pyment, consider fermenting a little bit warmer, just like you would with fermenting a red wine. It's going to bring out different esters, different flavor profiles from that yeast. It always amazed me. It's like, you get into home brewing, you're making wine, you're making beer, start making mead, and all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, depending on what yeast I use, it can make a whole different final product. But even if you focus on just one yeast, depending on what temperature you ferment that yeast at, can make a whole different final product as well. So, I mean, there's a whole spectrum of different things to kind of think about and take into consideration, depending on what you're making. And with Pyments, at least there's a little bit more help out there because there's more research on winemaking than there is on mead making, for sure. So there's definitely a lot of resources out there to kind of look into and try to dial in a really good plan for that recipe.
Yeah, I think one of the things you touched on that people, maybe kind of quizzing about a little bit is I want to ferment red wine warmer. People may not know, if you've ever been to Napa Valley during harvest and when they're fermenting stuff, you might be surprised at exactly how warm those big, huge tanks of red wine fermentations are. I mean, they'll get up into the 80s. They're fermenting. They look like they're boiling, and it's not like they're even moving it around. What in the world is going on there? And it's so different than what we've come to kind of arrive at as far as how we want to do the cool fermentations at 10 or 15 degrees cooler for the meads. It makes tons of sense to do that, but I think where people might not realize that if you're going to make the red pyment, it would make sense to investigate, does the yeast I want to use something like, was it BM 4x4, RC12? Take a look at the temperature range. They can go a lot higher, and then look and see if you can find articles, who knows where, Winemaker Magazine, Vineyard and Winery Management. Sometimes they'll do, articles about people's process, that sort of thing. And you look at it and say, oh, okay, they're actually legitimately telling me that they don't want the temperature to go below 75 degrees, which is completely different than what we do. It will make a
I need those yeasts.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it will make a difference. So I pulled up 2 different yeasts as we were talking that I've used recently for Pyments. Mostly white Pyments. I seem to like the white grape Pyments more than the reds, or at least my production seems to make me think that that's what I like. And these are 2 that are not necessarily as common. One of them is BB7 from Vintner's Wine Yeast. I don't know. I'm looking at a homebrewing.org link, and it's BB7. And what caught my attention was full-bodied, full-flavored, dry, and sweet white wines. So again, Pyments, I like my white Pyments a little sweet. So that one has worked really well. It's really nice and fruity. It does have more body. It's got more glycerins. You feel like it's a little bit thicker. So that one's been really successful for anyone who's looking for a lead on something different. And then another one that's been really wild is 58W3. And that one is specifically for white wines like Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer, Riesling, Viognier, and Semillon. And I just rattled off those 5 grapes. I've made Pymen out of 3 of those 5. All of them, like a Gewürztraminer Riesling blended Pyment, is going to be awesome.
Oh my God! I want a bottle of that. Yeah. I want a case of that.
You've got floral. You've just got all. And again, this is one where we just talked about fermenting warm. Well, don't do that with that one. Ferment that one cool, so you keep all of those awesome aromatics from the Gewürztraminer, the floral and the lychee and things like that. But this yeast specifically helps address bringing those components to forward when you be able to do this stuff. So those are just 2 examples of yeast selection where you're specifically thinking about something you're looking to do. It really does make a difference, and there are wine yeast out there that are very, very varietal specific.
Now I'm thinking about going to get Gewürztraminer grapes and Riesling grapes or juice and blending them using this 58W3, making this amazing Pyment, and then icing it. Making ice mead Pyment. Oh my God! Yeah, I'm sorry. I've got ice cider on the brain. I've got a bottle of Vermont ice cider sitting on the counter, looking at me, and I'm trying really hard not to drink it until I go to Florida and can share it with Hamish and Bruce. So, yeah, it's looking at me.
Yeah, I mean, when I made wine, from say 2004 through 2012, when I made a lot of wine, I would buy a bucket of Riesling juice and a bucket of Gewürztraminer juice.
I love Gewürz.
Every fall. And half of the time, I would make 3 wines. I would blend half of each and make a big batch of the blend, and then I'd end up with 3 gallons of each on their own. And despite the fact I had twice as much of the blend, it was always gone first. Just because both of those things just seemed to do a lot of things together that were great on their own, but everyone seemed to like it even better. So, made Riesling with strawberry.
Oh my God! Strawberry Riesling, that's like heaven in a bottle.
Well, then throw the orange blossom honey in the middle of that and make it a Pyment.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, and if you're making this, you'd better save me a bottle. I'm just saying. I will hunt you down, and I'm coming to New Hampshire next year, so just saying. You don't have long to live.
I do have a Shiraz Pyment going right now.
I could be persuaded to try that, yeah. All right, well, let me ask you a question from the South. Muscadine grapes are the big thing down here in North Carolina. That is the native grape, and there are so many wineries making muscadine wines. And I'm wondering, have either of you played with muscadine grapes or juice or both for a Pyment?
I have not. No.
I have not either. I went to, I can't remember which winery it is in Florida.
That's what I get for getting damn Yankees on the show.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say anything bad. I'm not going to say anything bad about it.
No, they're great grapes. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You don't see quantity really outside the South much.
If you find wild grapes up here, a lot of times they're going to be Concords. It's just because, especially in New Hampshire, if anybody says, I think I've got wild grapes out back, usually they're not telling you that they're white. They're usually saying they're red. Sometimes they're a white, but then it's still something like Diamond. And it's still like it's more of an eating grape than a wine grape. You can make good wine from it, but it's grapey grapes.
It's grapey grapes, yeah.
Yeah.
Lake Winery in Florida, I think they make a bunch of muscadines, and
well, no, there's wineries. I can't swing a cat without hitting a muscadine winery around here. They're everywhere, and one of my favorites is about an hour and a half east of me, but fact, I got some of their wine at the RV show this weekend. They had a booth, and I was like, I'll take some of that. But yeah, what I have not yet seen, and I really need to go poke